Hello, welcome to the reading room once again. I'm Joyce, and we are reading Gifted Hands, the Ben Carson story. And we're on chapter 2, entitled Beantown Rats, Spiders, and Change. And the reason that I'm reading this book is it's a success story, but his success was no easy feat. He had a lot of obstacles to overcome, a lot of hurdles, but he was determined and he persevered and achieved, as you know, many of you already know. He was a remarkable neurosurgeon and now he's a statesman. And so it can be an encouragement because everybody's story should be a success story. So, chapter 2, Beantown Rats, Spiders, and Change. Ben felt sad about leaving his home and friends in Michigan to live in a tenement building in Boston. But it wasn't long before he found out there was definitely an upside to living with the Averys. Their children were grown, so they had lots of love to show two young boys. The first Christmas, the Carsons lived in Boston. Ben's aunt, uncle, and mother showered the boys with gifts. Ben's favorite present was a chemistry set. He spent hours in his room reading the instructions, mixing chemicals, and watching them react. One of his experiments left the apartment building smelling like rotten eggs. Ben thought that was hilarious. What boy wouldn't, right? Not everything about the move was positive, however. Ben hated the rats that roamed in packs in the weeds behind the apartment building. Big rats, ugly rodents nearly as big as cats, lots of them. The horrid creatures usually stayed away from the building, but in the cold weather, the rats sometimes took refuge in the basement. Once a big snake slithered into the basement. Someone killed it, but afterwards all the neighborhood kids told stories about snakes eating children. Between the rats he'd seen and the snakes he'd heard about, Ben was always afraid to go into the basement. When they did feel the need for outdoor adventure, Ben and Curtis often played in a park not far from their apartment building. There they imagined their own mountain climbing and Wild West exploits as they scampered up, over, and around the large rock formations. One day, Ben climbed across the face of a rock wall on a dangerously high and narrow ledge. With one hand firmly jammed in a crack, he plastered his body against the rock as tightly as he could, slowly easing himself forward and feeling for some place to hold on with his other hand. Suddenly, a chunk of the ledge gave way beneath his feet. Ben was now dangling by just one hand. He listened to the sound of the broken rock hitting the ground far below. He looked, and just an arm's length ahead, the remaining ledge looked wider and stronger. But how could he get there? He needed a new handhold to reach it. From where he hung, he spotted another crevice he could reach with his free hand. If he could get a good grip there, he could swing himself over to the ledge. The trouble was, he could see a thick spider's web stretched across the opening. Ben loved all kinds of animals, well, almost all kinds of animals. He absolutely hated spiders. They terrified him, and he'd seen some humongous wolf spiders with webs just like this one among the rocks at that park. He thought, there's no way I'll stick my hand in that nest of wolf spiders. Then Ben looked down. He was a long way up, and the ground below was rocky. He did not want to think about how badly he'd be hurt if he fell from this height. He was terrified of spiders, but right then he was more afraid of falling. I need a handhold in that crevice, Ben told himself. So he stretched and put his hand through the spider's web and into the opening in the rock. He gained a solid grip, swung his feet onto the ledge, and quickly scampered off the rock wall safely. Ben learned an important lesson. Sometimes to survive, you need to face your fear and overcome it. Good point. The added sense of danger Ben experienced living in Boston was merely the result of the young boy's fertile imagination. His new neighborhood was definitely tougher than the one he lived in Detroit. He often encountered homeless drunks sleeping on the sidewalk outside his apartment building. All hours of the day, police cars raced through the streets, their sirens blasting and lights flashing. One of the Avery's sons was shot to death on those streets. Ben had liked and looked up to that young adult cousin. But in addition to feeling a terrible sadness over his cousin's senseless death, Ben realized his cousin, by associating with drug dealers, had been doing something that he shouldn't have been doing when he was killed. That too was a valuable lesson. Ben made up his mind right then. Some things aren't worth the risk. While the Carson family lived in Boston, Ben's mother made 2 or 3 more visits to relatives, which we know was her going to a mental hospital, for 3 or 4 weeks at a time. But Ben and Curtis, though they missed their mother, never worried. They never questioned why she had to leave. They trusted Aunt Jean and Uncle William to take great care of them. Ben and Curtis were usually a bit spoiled by the time their mother returned. In Boston, just as she had back in Detroit, Ben's mother worked for several well-to-do families, caring for their children and cleaning their homes. Many days she left work early in the morning before the boys went to school and didn't get home until after or almost bedtime. Just the same, she always took time to ask Ben and Curtis what they were doing and learning in school, no matter how tired she was or how many hours she had worked that day. Ben and his brother knew their mother thought their education was important and that she wanted them to excel in school, and they did. Both boys did well in their classes at the small private school they attended in Boston. Ben's mother wanted her sons to learn the importance of setting goals in life. Almost every day, she talked to Ben and Curtis about her goal of saving enough money to someday move back to their house in Detroit. Sonia Carson also taught her sons the value of $1. For instance, riding to school on the city bus cost 20 cents a day, the same price as a loaf of bread then. So Ben and Curtis rode their bikes to school, and the money they saved was used to buy groceries for the family. Ben's mother liked to say, "A penny saved is a penny earned." The boys learned never to be late in returning a library book. They never walked past an alley without looking to see if they could spot a bottle they could turn in for a penny deposit. No amount of money was too small when it came to spending or saving. There were other important lessons Sonia managed to teach her sons, and Ben was reminded of one of them the day a store clerk made the mistake of giving him too much change. That is a good test. Instead of a $1 bill, she handed Ben a 10. Even before he walked out the door of the store, he realized the mistake and excitedly began to fantasize, "What can I do with $9 extra?" But by the time he reached home, Ben had a knot in his stomach the size of a fist in which he still clutched the money. And he was no longer feeling good about his good fortune. Ben recognized the feeling he was experiencing. He knew it was guilt. He knew keeping the money wouldn't be honest, and honesty was an important principle he learned from his mother as well as at church. Ben immediately turned around, walked back to the store, where he returned the $10 bill to the clerk and explained what happened. She gave him the correct change, and he strode out of the store, $9 poorer, but feeling on top of the world. Good decision, Ben. Recalling the incident years later, Ben would say, that experience reinforced for me an even more important truth than the virtue of honesty. It reminded me that there is such a thing as right and wrong. And when you do what is right, based on the principles you believe in, that satisfaction results. The satisfaction that results is better than having money. During their 2 years in Boston, the Carson family saved enough pennies, nickels, and dimes to move back to Michigan. They still couldn't afford to live in the little house on Deacon Street, but they were closer, and the boys were glad to be near their old friends. However, a few weeks after they returned to school in Detroit, both Ben and Curtis realized they had a serious problem. In Boston, they had been among the better students in their classes. In Detroit, they were behind their classmates. Ben understood so little of what his class was studying, he began to fear his dream of becoming a missionary doctor was drifting out of reach. He also began to believe what the other kids were saying about him. So we'll find out in chapter 3 what the other kids were saying about Ben and how it affected him. So join me again for the reading room as we continue with Gifted Hands, the Ben Carson story.